We want to get you up to speed on some breaking news to report right now on the effort to replace Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor. CBS News has confirmed that retired Vice Admiral Robert Harward has turned the job down. At issue, staffing. Harward wanted to bring in his own people. The Trump administration resisted. Harward is a former Navy SEAL who had previously served on the National Security Council. He had been considered a potentially stabilizing choice after Flynn was forced to resign after a series of misleading statements about his ties to Russia. It's not clear at this time who will become President Trump's new National Security Advisor. For more now on this, we want to go by phone to CBS News Radio White House correspondent Stephen Portnoy. Stephen, what do you make of this?
Well, Jamie, honestly, it seems as though this is one of those circumstances where someone who is in line to be a high-level executive in an organization who wants to shape, the power structure below him is told by his higher-ups that he does not have that power, and he's decided not to take the job. The news is coming to us from our colleague Major Garrett, our chief White House correspondent, who says that Robert Harward specifically wanted to oust K.T. McFarland, who is now serving as the Deputy National Security Advisor. It was a team put together by Michael Flynn, who, as we know, was let go by President Trump earlier this week. And when the White House resisted Harward when he said he wanted to install his own team throughout the National Security Council staff, and the White House said no, Harward said no thank you, and has turned down the job, Jamie.
Well, do you think this is fascinating to me because just a few hours ago at a press conference, President Donald Trump said his decision to replace Mr. Flynn had been made easier because he had, quote, an outstanding candidate to serve as a replacement. We believed he was talking about Harward, so it would seem that the conversation broke down just recently.
Well, it was about 24 hours ago that we got word that Harward had been offered the job and was considering it. But the sticking point, as we had reported then, was exactly what wound up bringing this to a close. And that was the fact that Harward wanted to install his own people across the national security staff. He did not want to have to deal with the team that General Flynn put in place. Remember, Vice Admiral Robert Harward rose from a Navy SEAL to Navy SEAL commander to becoming Deputy Commander of Central Command, and came to this discussion on the recommendation of James Mattis, the Defense Secretary. So he came very highly recommended. He certainly knows up and down across not only the Navy, but also as the Deputy Commander of CENTCOM, the entire Joint Forces structure, and again, came highly recommended by the Defense Secretary. So he was certainly the top contender. That gave him considerable leverage, or so he thought. But when he asked to bring his own people to the table across the National Security Council staff, teams of dozens of people who help him advise the president on matters of war and peace, well, when they told him he couldn't have that, he said no thank you.
You know, all you read about this guy, like you were just talking about, Navy SEAL, he's got the resume, but he's also very well liked, it sounds like. What kind of decision is this, do you think, by the Trump administration to not let him do what he wanted to do and take the job? It seems like he would have reduced turmoil within, some of the administration that's been rocking it in recent weeks.
It's obviously something that they carefully weighed. President Trump has a lot of regard, we know, for K.T. McFarland, who has over the years served on cable television as a military analyst. He trusts her, clearly, and appreciates her counsel. She was part of his team of advisors on foreign policy during the campaign and the transition, and he obviously didn't want to see her go and have to take the fall for what happened with General Flynn. So I guess they lose out on the opportunity to work with Vice Admiral Harward. And again, Harward must have thought that he had the leverage and the power to say these are the terms under which he would accept the deal, and the deal was broken. And you have to know one thing about President Donald Trump, and that is he, as a negotiator, has got to be ready to walk away at any time.
Yeah, it sounds like that may have happened on both ends here. We're really not sure exactly how this broke down. But, I think it's also important to point out that earlier today, Mr. Trump did, in fact, lash out at the media, kept saying in his press conference he held earlier that his administration and what was happening was not chaotic, that it was running like a fine-tuned machine. Does he now blame the media for this, or how do you think that piece of it plays out, or he just uses what he's talked about before in terms of it just was a bad deal and a bad negotiation?
Well, I'm not sure. I would never dare to prejudge what will come out of President Trump's Twitter account or his mouth
Yeah.
on an issue like this. But
I should pull it up right now. You're right, Stephen. I should be watching.
Right. But listen, this is another example of an embarrassing episode that really brings truth to what the president said about how his White House is not in chaos, but is a well-oiled machine or something along those lines. Clearly, it's not that. This is now the second time that the president has tried to install a national security advisor, someone in a pivotal role, and he's been unsuccessful at accomplishing that deal. He announced today his second choice for labor secretary after Andy Puzder yesterday dropped out of the running. He couldn't get through the Senate confirmation process. And it wasn't for something that he recently did or said, but clearly for a lack of proper vetting on the part of the Trump transition team to not know that there was the issue, for example, with the housekeeper who was an illegal immigrant and he didn't pay taxes. And then there was the issue, of course, with his ex-wife's appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 1990. That videotape just surfaced in the last 48 hours. That doomed his nomination. All these things you'd imagine would have come through in a normal vetting process if it were a normal vetting process.
Yeah, Stephen, if people are just joining us right now, I want to go ahead and kind of recap what we've been talking about. If you're just tuning in here at CBSN, we've been talking for the last couple of days that Mr. Trump had asked Robert Harward, a retired Navy Special Forces officer, to succeed Mr. Michael Flynn, who was fired as National Security Advisor on Monday when he handed in his resignation. At a press conference today, the president did talk about this being someone that he found to be a fine, outstanding candidate. And now it appears that the retired Admiral Robert Harward will not accept the position as National Security Advisor to replace Michael Flynn. It's turning President Trump down essentially at this point in time over staffing issues. And Stephen, if you just want to go ahead and kind of recap what we've learned about these talks and how this broke down, feel free.
Sure, Jamie. And once again, this is coming to us from our chief White House correspondent, our colleague Major Garrett, who has spoken to sources who tell him that essentially this was a breakdown of the negotiations over the terms and conditions of employment. And Robert Harward, the former deputy commander of Central Command who started his military career more than 40 years ago, rose through the Navy SEALs and ultimately retired from the armed forces in 2013, was recommended by James Mattis, the defense secretary, and in the end decided that he did not want to take the job, mainly because he wanted to install his own people in senior positions on the national security staff. Particularly, he wanted to replace K.T. McFarland, who has been serving as the deputy national security advisor. The White House said no go, but Harward said no thank you.
Stephen Portnoy, thank you so much for being with us with CBS Radio. Appreciate the breakdown in what we're talking about tonight and the analysis. Thanks so much.
You bet.